Hi, this is Chris with firstcenturychristianity.net. Today I'm talking about the state of the dead. This is a topic that is very unique for those of us who are commandment keeping Christians, those who keep the Torah and follow Yeshua, whatever you want to call us these days. Those of us in the way, those of us who follow first century Christianity, we have a particular belief that we are almost 100% united on, and 100% united against what everybody else believes. And that's the state of the dead. Now, today, I'm going to talk about this topic. And I realize that I don't have a page for this. I don't have a dedicated video for this because it only comes up when we talk about prophecy, or prophecy. It doesn't come up a lot, the state of the dead, mostly because the people in this movement are so united on our understanding of it, and the people who are not in this movement are so united in their understanding or misunderstanding of it, as the case may be. So here it is, and hopefully that this can do some good and get some people to start opening up their Bibles and taking a critical look at something that most people take for granted, with whichever side of the fence that you're on here. So the first slide here is a preface, and the preface is scope and importance. In Hebrews 9:27 through 28, it is written, "And inasmuch as it is appointed for men to die once, and after this comes judgment, so Christ also, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time for salvation without reference to sin, to those who eagerly await him." The scope here is that you could, if you keep the Torah, if you keep Sabbath, you don't eat pork, you keep the holy days, and you believe that Yeshua is the Messiah, and you believe that he's returning, you could sit in a church with somebody who doesn't agree with you on the state of the dead for your entire life and never know it. This is not a salvational issue. It is important, but this isn't something that rises to the level of, well, it can, anything can rise to the level of salvational issue, but generally this isn't, because you can, believe either way or a combination of both, and as long as you're doing today what the Messiah commanded us to do today, it doesn't matter if you get judged at the moment of death, and or if you get judged at some future time. It doesn't matter what happens next, because we don't believe that anything happens next, either side. We both think that death, and believe that death, that we have one life and we die at the end of this life, and the next is eternity. Both things are true regardless of how you come down on this issue. And the second preface is to kind of head off people who want to, kind of try to tell me that I haven't read the Bible or something like that, is just say that there are verses that sound like souls are immortal, and that people are somehow conscious or continue to live in some form or fashion after they pass away. The reason that we go on this trek here is because sometimes doctrines are really black and white. Like the Sabbath never changed. The Sabbath is Friday sunset to Saturday sunset, and has been since the week of creation. That's an absolute. That's it, right? This one takes work to get there. You have to kind of go on a journey. So it's not really cut and dry. We have to reason together to figure it out. Now, I said it's not a salvation issue, but there's a big but in there. There's a big however. The origin of this doctrine and concept of immortal souls is not in doubt, and it is not biblical. It doesn't come from the Bible. We read it into the Bible because of our society. Everybody is taught almost from before you can walk that people who think angels are babies who died and got turned into angels, people who think your relatives are looking over you. This isn't just a Judeo-Christian phenomenon. This is in every religion on the earth. The only people who don't believe that are you and me, the people in this walk, and atheists. And the atheists are like a sect of the Jews from the first century that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But I'm using Microsoft Copilot today because the internet has evolved, right? When I started in this walk, it was books, library. You either bought the book online if you could find it because there wasn't Amazon, or you checked it out of the library, or you, accumulated knowledge the old-fashioned way by reading a 350-page book because you wanted to know about one paragraph inside of that book. You were your own database. Then the internet came along, and we were able to find these books and find each other easier, find information easier. The internet has evolved now to where people are going to college entirely electronically, not touching books at all, only doing PDFs. And now it's advanced again with these AI. This really isn't AI. It's not artificial intelligence. It's just a hyper super duper search engine that gives you your answers rather than making you read a bunch of pages. So we're lazy. But I asked Microsoft Copilot, what is the origin of immortal souls? And it spit back the right answer. Egypt, Babylon, Greek, Pythagoras and Socrates, Plato. And it doesn't get into Judaism until the Septuagint is created, which is about 200 years before Yeshua. So just understand that if you are in the immortal soul camp, you are united in a one world religion that's not founded in the Bible. Sorry, tough truth, but it is what it is. Okay. What does the Torah say about this? And let me catch up with my slides here. A minute ago, I talked about the Sadducees. Now, you may already know this to some degree or another, but the first century Judea had two main sects of Judaism, SECTS, two main branches of Judaism. And they had to get along every day, and they had to mock each other every day because they were Jews and they were in Judea and they weren't leaving. And so they argued all the time. The Sadducees were in charge of the temple. They were predominantly the people on the Sanhedrin, and they did not believe in any book of the Bible after the first five. So that's a problem because everybody else, including the Messiah, believed in everything in the 24 book Tanakh, or 22, depends on how you count it. So Yeshua aligned more with the Pharisees than he did the Sadducees. And they were trying to trip him up when they asked him about whose wife is the lady going to be in the resurrection. They were trying to set up a straw man argument that couldn't be answered. When a woman died childless 7 times, or no, she didn't die. Her husband died without giving her a child 7 times. Whose wife will she be in the resurrection? And he had to answer that, but he didn't say there is no resurrection. They were trying to get him to say there's no resurrection. He goes, well, you guys don't understand the resurrection. And he went on to explain it. What they never argued about was eternal souls. Okay, that wasn't a thing, right? Yeshua didn't go, you don't understand, there is no resurrection. Everybody goes straight to heaven or hell when they die. He didn't say that. They didn't believe that. Nobody argued about that in the Gospels, even though I do see the point that it sounds like people are alive in some verses of the Bible. They didn't believe it. There wasn't really a thought process. So the immortal soul thing is not part of the Bible. It's not biblical in origin. And Sadducees quarrel with Yeshua and the Pharisees, and then when Peter and John go to the Pharisees in Acts 4, or go to the Sanhedrin in Acts 4, they're going to tell the high priest, who does not believe in the resurrection of the dead, that there is a resurrection of the dead. That's the actual crux of it. They killed Yeshua, and Yeshua was resurrected by God. They're telling them 2 things that they don't want to hear. A, the guy you killed is back to life. And B, coming back to life is a real thing. So it's pretty striking when you think of it in those terms. So when the arguments come up with Paul and Yeshua and the Sadducees, if these guys wanted to correct people on immortal souls, they missed the boat, because the resurrection of the dead is one of the key doctrines, if not the central doctrine for those in the first century. And Paul talks about it a lot because Yeshua, being resurrected by God 3 days and 3 nights after he was assassinated, after he was murdered, is a big deal. It's a big deal because the Son of God was resurrected and now all of our sins are forgiven. But it's also a big deal if people don't believe in the resurrection of the dead. Okay? So we come to a crossroads, and this is how we get to understanding this topic. When I was studying and when I first came out of Babylon and I read the Bible entirely once and maybe half again, or maybe I read it 2 times, and I started to go on the internet. It was back when the internet was in its infancy, so to speak, and I was watching theological discussions and debates on different internet forums. And so I had to come up with a system to figure out what I was going to listen to and what I wasn't going to listen to. What doctrines was I going to entertain? And if you just read a modern version of the Bible, New King James, NIV, NASB, ESV, if you read one of those from cover to cover, you're going to have a really good handle on the outline of Scripture. It's the studying part comes later. If you just read the Bible from cover to cover, you're going to have a really good idea about God's relationship with mankind and God's intention for mankind. And it's one continuous document, starts in Genesis, ends in Revelation. And so people are throwing the doctrines at me, so many, so fast, that I came up with a system that I nicknamed extreme fundamentalism. Actually, the names are backwards. The fundamental part starts first. So if somebody threw a doctrine at me and it says, does that change the fundamental meaning of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation? And if the answer was no, if his doctrine came at me and it was no, then I would move on to number 2 and take it to its extreme, or take it to its logical conclusion. Move the chess pieces 3 or 4 moves down the board and see if it still makes sense. So in the case of, say, Calvinism, for instance, the once saved, always saved, you can sin and you're saved, and everybody's depraved, and I'm starting to rhyme here. When that came to me, that fails both tests. There's no, it's not biblical in any sense of the word, right? People are not totally depraved. Our works do matter. You can lose your salvation, and you have to work. There is no such thing as faith without works. It just doesn't exist. So that breaks both of them. So that fundamentally changes the Bible's meaning from a relationship between us and God to God selectively choosing who's going to be saved and who's going to not be saved, irrespective of their activities whatsoever. And if you take it to its logical conclusion, it's just an absurd, it's madness. It's madness. It doesn't make sense. And you can't even, like, if you purely tried to apply that philosophy to your life, you really couldn't live from day to day. If somebody could punch you in the nose and you could be like, well, I must have deserved it because God told them to punch me in the nose, and you couldn't defend yourself. It's absurd. It's an absurd doctrine. So this one, though, we get back to, I'm digressing here, we get back to the 2 steps, the 2 divergence of the afterlife, or whether souls are eternal or whether death is sleep. It doesn't break the first one. It fundamentally, you can, if you're judged when you die, or you're judged at a resurrection, it's kind of the same thing. Then it's the next stop. It's the rest of Scripture that it has to fit in, and it doesn't. So we're going to take a quick walk on that. Could be on this for hours, but I'm really going to try to keep it to under 40 minutes and show you some scriptures that make it impossible for death to mean anything but sleep. Keeping in mind that there are verses that sound different, but this is when you actually look at the topic at hand and you look at the events that are going to come in prophecy, the things that are set in stone, that are absolutely going to come. You look at Yeshua's example, and you have to see that the right branch is going to be the branch you want to go on. But again, if you go down either one of these branches and decide to change your mind and come back and go the other way, you're still not going to change your day-to-day activity. So it's not a terrible paramount type understanding. So, first verse I want to talk about here, take a break, have a little bit of iced tea, is from John 5, my favorite chapter of the Bible, 5:28-29. Yeshua, Jesus, says, "Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming in which all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and will come forth, those who did the good deeds to a resurrection of life, and those who committed the evil deeds to a resurrection of judgment." Now, these two sentences here, this one long sentence, pretty much is it, right? Where are dead people? They're in the tombs. When they come forth, they're going to come forth to either a resurrection of life or a resurrection of judgment. Now, judgment doesn't mean condemnation. This verse is completely wrong in the King James Bible. Judgment means a resurrection of decision, judgment day, when people's lives are put before Yeshua and he decides who's going to be a sheep and who's going to be a goat, who's going to be in the kingdom and who's going to be out of the kingdom. So this is talking about a judgment day for all mankind in a future time. And a resurrection of life is a resurrection of people who are not judged at an earlier time. Both of these things are future events. And he says, all who are in the tombs. This washes with the Old Testament, where it talks about the people going down to Sheol in peace, going down in the grave, going down into the earth, into a pit, the Sheol, and being gathered with their fathers. When they're gathered with their fathers, that means that they're buried in the same sepulcher as their fathers, a family tomb. So all this starts for the whole Bible to make sense right here. And there's a surprise, because this is a quotation from the prophet Daniel. And Daniel 12, 1-2. At that time, Michael, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise, and there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be rescued. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but the others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. You could see that Yeshua was not breaking ground in John 5:28-29, but he was actually building upon something that was already revealed to the prophet Daniel. And this is why the people in the first century believed in the resurrection of the dead. People who are dead are asleep in the dust of the ground. They're going to awake. They're going to come up out of the tombs. Some are coming to everlasting life, a resurrection of life. Others to disgrace and contempt, a resurrection of judgment. And so this is a very, very cinchy way of washing the two things together and putting the concept of what happens when you die in a very quickly defined using scripture. And I'm way ahead of my notes here. So the word for death in Hebrew is muth, M-U-T-H, and it is the opposite of life. The Greek equivalent is apothekos, apothnesko. And both of these words mean to die. That's something I wanted to talk about too, because words have to have meaning. They don't mean to live on in another fashion. So the idea of immortal souls is that in the extreme, there are some people who believe that we existed before we had bodies. None of us could remember it, but they believe we existed before we had bodies, and then we have bodies for a time, and then we go back to where we came from. That's pure pagan, by the way. That is Greek mythology that Pythagoras is, and who's the other guy that talked about Platoism, all these guys. They believed that the stars were your souls, and the blackness was ether, and the falling star was a soul descending through the different levels of existence, and that your job in this life was to live good enough so that you could ascend through works back up to where you came from. That's paganism. Okay. So the opposite of that, or the truth, is how we talk about here in the book of Daniel, and John 5:28-29, that dead people are actually you're created when you're created. You start when Yahweh creates you, when you're knit together in the womb, you're born, you live a life, you die, and then you are buried in the ground. And then at some point in the future, you'll be resurrected, which is what the prophet Daniel is explaining right here. It's John 11:11-15. And this is an actual event that happened during Yeshua's ministry to explain these things in a literal and practical fashion. So this, he said, Yeshua, and after that, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go so that I may awaken him out of sleep. The disciples then said to him, Lord, if he's fallen asleep, then he will recover. And Yeshua had spoken of his death, but they thought that he was speaking of literal sleep. So Yeshua then said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there so that you may believe, but let us go to him. Now, if you're Yeshua and all things were created through you, and you understand how mankind works and how this all operates, you're going to equate sleep with death, because death is sleep. And that's what he's saying right here. This is the story of how Lazarus dies, and they're 4 days away, and that 4 days is important because Yeshua wants to make darn sure that this guy is dead. He's not in a coma. Nobody can kind of second guess what happens here. And they show up and they say, oh, he's decomposed. There's going to be a stench. You don't want to open that tomb. And it opens the tomb, and the guy has been resurrected by God, and he comes out of the tomb. Yeshua thanks God for it, and it proves the resurrection is a real thing, and prefaces Yeshua's own death and resurrection, where he was in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. So we fast forward a little bit in this story down to verse 21. And Martha then said to Yeshua, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Yeshua said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Yeshua said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, and even he who comes into the world. So Martha is in a little bit better place than the disciples because she understood her brother was going to rise again at the resurrection. She understood that because of the book of Daniel, and she understood that because she was not a Sadducee. She was a Pharisee, and she believed in the Bible canon of the day, which had 22 or 24 Bible books, however you count them. So the knowledge of the resurrection, her knowledge of the resurrection is 100% Old Testament based because there is no New Testament at this point in time. So we can't say that this idea was injected or introduced with the apostles who wrote, 20, 30 years after the Messiah ascended. People try to say the last part of this means that those who believe in him will literally never die. Doesn't kind of sounds like it. It's one of those verses where it kind of sounds like it. Only if you ignore what just happened. Only if you ignore the rest of the verses. What he's referring to again is dying, and they will live and will never die, means that everyone who is resurrected will never die. Obviously, Lazarus died. He believed Yeshua was the Son of God. He believed he was the Messiah, and he died, as did all the apostles. Okay. And Yeshua brings the Lazarus back to life to show that the resurrection of the dead is a real thing. Eternal souls were not on the docket. In this paradigm, this is not a parable, this is real, this happened. Yeshua did not yank Lazarus out of heaven and stuff him back into his body. Lazarus was dead in the tomb, meaning he ceased to exist and he was asleep in that tomb. And when he was resurrected, when Yahweh brought him back to life, he became himself again. He came right back up where he left off. Okay. Now, 1 Corinthians 15 is the resurrection chapter. This is another big chunk of the Bible that doesn't make sense if souls are immortal and you're judged immediately when you die, or you go on to purgatory, or you go to hell for a while, or you go to heaven for a while. It explicitly tells us what's going to happen. I didn't put the whole chapter up. I was quite tempted to. And here's the excerpt. Now, if this is Paul, if Christ has preached that he has been raised from the dead, how do some of you say there is no resurrection of the dead? Apparently, there were people who accepted the Messiah and retained the Sadducee belief in no resurrection of the dead, similar to atheists today. Back to the verse. But if there is no resurrection of the dead, not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain. Your faith also is in vain. Moreover, we are even found to be false witnesses of God, because we testified against God that he raised Christ, whom he did not raise, if in fact the dead are not raised. This is a problem for mainstream Christianity, because this was an incredibly important topic to Paul and the apostles, that the resurrection is real. And we don't hear that from mainstream Christianity. Even the Catholic Church, which has a prayer that they all say, a creed they all recite every week, ends with dead people being dead and them looking forward to the resurrection of the dead. They still don't believe it. They'll still walk over and light a candle for somebody who they think is in heaven or hell or purgatory or some such thing. So this is a big departure, and it really helps us to understand the Bible and understand the plan of salvation and understand where this world is going. This will be the closing set of verses, but there were quite a few more I wanted to include. For the sake of time, this is the closer. But you should read Ezekiel 37 and 38, and Revelation 20, Acts 2, Acts 4, and Acts 7, particularly verse 60 of that chapter, where we literally see Stephen get stoned and go to sleep. Okay? It says death is sleep again in the book of Acts. There's a lot more areas I'd love to include, but alas, this is already over 2,000 words on print. So the resurrection of the dead is a key doctrine or concept that the New Testament authors go out of their way to prove, and it was an existing, understood doctrine of the day. Then we have Lazarus resurrected, and we have Yeshua resurrected, and it's proven. So we should really hold on to this doctrine, because it's a kind of a waypoint in the plan of salvation, that this is the way it is. And when we accept this foundation, the Bible just makes a lot more sense. Resurrection is the act of bringing people back to life out of sleep, out of the graves. It is founded on death being the cessation of life, not life in another capacity. While understanding this isn't salvational, it does help to make the Bible a whole lot more sense. We can understand in Genesis how death entered the world through sin, and how the Messiah solved that problem, and how death is going to be the last enemy thrown into the lake of fire in the book of Revelation. Jesus, the Messiah, had to die innocently, bearing the sins of those who accept him as the Son of God, and then be resurrected because he died an innocent life to bear our sins. We follow that pattern. We follow the pattern, and that's what 1 Corinthians 15 says, that there's a pattern of Christ the first fruits, then those who are his at his coming. Paul says explicitly that those who are saved, those people who are in the saved category when they die, will come to life when the Messiah returns and raised to meet him in the air. He says this in 1 Thessalonians 2, I believe. These verses just simply don't make sense if the people are already up there. What are they going to be yanked back down? It doesn't make any sense. So I hope that those of you who haven't heard this before will consider returning to this first century truth and enjoy the blessings that we get from understanding that death means sleep, and that we are looking forward to one of two resurrections. Please like and subscribe this wherever you may find it. Thank you for watching so much. Please offer any feedback, even if you want to ignore my warning and throw me some verses, let me know you're out there. And if this helped you out, please, please let me know, because that always warms the heart and lets me know that the work is not, that I'm not just talking to myself on these videos. And please drop by the assembly every Shabbat, every Saturday at 1 p.m. in North Kansas City or online. We would love to have you and meet you as we explore what the Bible meant to the first century believers and apply that to our lives. May Yahweh bless you and keep you in the name of his son, Yeshua. Thanks.